The FBI deals with some strange, unusual, and disturbing cases. FBI files often involve crimes that hit large groups of people, or creepy crimes that remain unsolved for decades. Number 5. After an investigation of more than 5 years, the FBI was finally able to trace millions of dollars that had been stolen in 2016. In August of 2016, a hacker broke into a cryptocurrency exchange website called Bitfinex and managed to get away with almost 120,000 Bitcoin. At the time, it was worth around $71 million. Today, it's worth $5 billion. For years, most of that money was untouched in a digital wallet. Someone with access to the wallet slowly pulled away small amounts of money through a series of complex transactions. Cashing out a large sum would have been impossible, so the money had to be laundered in discrete amounts. Because Bitcoin is traceable, the transactions were designed to make it harder to follow the stolen money. Eventually, FBI investigators were able to trace some of the funds to a couple living in Manhattan. Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan were arrested in February. Lichtenstein is a tech investor who moved to the US from Russia when he was 6. His wife Morgan described herself as a serial investor and economist who writes about cryptocurrencies. Both were tech-savvy, but neither came across as criminal masterminds, and those who knew them couldn't believe they were involved in the case. According to investigators, the couple were responsible for laundering money from the hack, and haven't been accused of the hack itself. They were only able to move a small fraction of the money, though. They allegedly tried to clean the money by using it to buy Walmart gift cards and gold coins, as well as moving it through several different accounts before depositing the coin in wallets attached to their own names. In a search of their apartment, law enforcement allegedly found several burner phones which were encrypted, fake identities, hollowed out books with secret compartments, and $40,000 in cash. During the investigation, they also found evidence that the couple had been making arrangements for if they had to flee to Russia. While the couple await trial, the mystery of where most of the money is, at least, has been solved. Most of the money that was stolen has been seized, though around $330 million is still unaccounted for. Number 4. One of the biggest FBI operations in recent years was Operation Disruptor. The FBI worked with various US and international organizations to disrupt the industry selling illegal substances on the so-called dark web. Over the years, there have been many operations that have shut down major websites that act as hubs for people to buy and sell anything and everything on the dark web. Operation Disruptor wasn't about taking down any one individual site, but targeted the vendors of such sites. 179 people across the US, Canada, and Europe were arrested as part of the operation. Millions of dollars, large amounts of illegal substances, and weapons were seized in the operation. In the US, 2 Los Angeles locations were raided. The small warehouses looked like typical mail-order business operations, but between the packing tape and mail supplies were millions of dollars worth of illegal substances. The business that ran out of the warehouse was the biggest vendor for that particular substance that the FBI had ever uncovered. One of the 179 people arrested as part of the operation was Aaron Brewer. Brewer was a 39-year-old war veteran living in Texas. After stints in Afghanistan left him with physical and mental health problems, he turned to an unusual post-army career. For about a year, he used the dark web to sell illegal substances to buyers around the US. Using the US Postal Service to do so, he earned tens of thousands of dollars through the business and was able to pay off his mortgage. In 2021, he was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison and had to forfeit the house he had bought with his illegal activity. Number 3. Oftentimes, cold cases can remain unsolved for years, not because the police don't have any answers, but because there isn't enough evidence to back those answers up. That was the case with the crime against James Ricks. James was a 27-year-old African-American man who disappeared in June of 1967. His 1964 Oldsmobile was also missing. 2 months later, his body was found in a wooded area by hikers. He had suffered 2 bullet wounds, one in the back of the head. Police already had clear suspects by the time James's body was found. 2 weeks after he disappeared, Leon Jr. Clay and his younger brother James Leon Clay had been arrested. They were found in James Rick's missing car and were both carrying stolen weapons when police found them. The night James had disappeared, the Clay brothers had robbed a pawn shop in Little Rock, Arkansas. At first, they used a getaway vehicle, but it soon broke down, and the brothers walked along some train tracks until they could find another car. That was when they stumbled across James, who had been asleep in his car. They woke him up and stole the vehicle. Despite all the evidence, the brothers didn't confess to any of their crimes. There was enough evidence to convict them both for the robbery and stealing of James's car, but there wasn't a watertight case against them when it came to taking James's life. As they didn't admit anything, they were never charged with this more serious crime, and received a relatively light sentence for theft and transporting stolen goods to a different state. The Arkansas robbery wouldn't be the final time police had to deal with the brothers. In 2011, James Leon Clay tried to rob a bank in Delaware. He was in his mid-60s at the time, and his older brother had already passed away. When the teller told him she didn't have any money, he tried to flee but was caught and handed another 3-year sentence. It was only then that the long cold case was finally broken open again. While in prison, Clay confessed to taking James's life. He told his cellmate details about how he and his brother committed the crime. Clay's cellmate told his brother-in-law, who contacted authorities. The details were enough to convince police that it was a real confession, but they needed it on tape. By this point, the cellmate had been moved to a different prison, so it wouldn't be until Clay was released that they would finally get the evidence they needed. The unidentified cellmate and Clay met up at a probation office in 2012 where they got to chatting. Clay again retold the story of how he had gotten away with such a dark crime. This time, the former cellmate was wearing a wire, and police got the confession on tape. Clay was arrested and pleaded guilty. He was given a 20-year prison sentence and will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Number 2. One of the strangest FBI cases in recent years was the so-called spine collector. Despite the morbid name, the crimes of this individual didn't actually claim any lives, but were in fact a much more bizarre series of crimes that took place between 2016 and 2021. At the start of 2022, the FBI revealed that they had arrested the individual they believed to be responsible for the crimes, but the question of why is still a mystery. To put it simply, the FBI were looking for a book thief. Starting in 2016, an unknown individual had been impersonating people in the publishing industry to steal unpublished manuscripts. The criminal took the identities of staff members at publishing companies, agents, and literary scouts, as well as created fake websites that almost perfectly resembled those of publishing companies and databases. The mysterious criminal then communicated via email with authors and companies. They clearly knew a lot about the publishing industry, the process of getting a novel from the first draft to bookshelves around the world, and the connections between different people in the industry. So when the emails asked for a manuscript to be sent over, they never seemed out of the ordinary. Lots of authors fell for the scam. In one instance, the criminal pretended to be an author's agent and knew about characters in her unpublished novel and about her upcoming deadline. In another instance, a talent scout was bombarded with emails pretending to be various people she knew. When the scout emailed the authentic account of one of these individuals who happened to be a friend, they responded that they had no idea what was going on and described the email as sinister. Just minutes later, the criminal contacted the scout again, copying almost word for word the email from the friend. Not only did they have insider knowledge of the industry, it seemed like they had access to the scout's actual email inbox. The book thief really shook the publishing industry. The biggest mystery was who the individual was, but people were also puzzled about why they were doing this. It would make sense if the criminal was targeting high-profile authors and releasing their work online. There would be a market for early access to the work of a famous author, but none of the stolen manuscripts were ever released online. The thief also targeted unknown authors, where there wouldn't be a market for the manuscripts at all. The thief also didn't try to get a ransom from anyone. Sometimes they would send back pages of the manuscript to taunt their victims, but they never demanded money. There also didn't seem to be any reason to go through all this effort to get the manuscripts, except that the criminal just really wanted to read them. In January of 2022, the FBI finally arrested the individual they thought was responsible. Filippo Bernardini is a 29-year-old Italian man working for a London publishing company. He speaks multiple languages and tried to make a career as a translator for various companies. He also worked with and for some of the companies and individuals who were targeted in the scheme. Bernardini was arrested after getting off a plane at JFK Airport and was charged with fraud and aggravated identity theft. He's pleaded not guilty, and the FBI has yet to reveal any motive behind this strange crime. Number 1. In 2022, the FBI were finally able to close a cold case that had remained unsolved for more than 4 decades. Eve Wilkowitz had been 20 years old when she vanished while walking home in the early hours of March 22, 1980. 3 days later, her body was discovered in the front yard of a house not far from her Long Island home. Eve was a bright young woman with ambitions of going into social work. At the time of her passing, she was studying to achieve that goal. All the while, she worked as a secretary in Manhattan. About 6 weeks before the crime, she had met a young writer named Jack Dempsey, who she had begun to date. On the evening of March 21st, she and Jack had enjoyed dinner together and had gone to watch a movie. It was a Friday night, and Jack had suggested that she stay the night, but Eve had responsibilities she needed to deal with in the morning. She took a cab to Pennsylvania Station at about midnight for the last Long Island Railroad train of the night. As was usual, Jack offered to go the whole journey back to her Long Island home with her. Eve had previously told him and the man that she lived with that she'd been followed home from the train station late at night. But she told Jack that she felt safe with everyone around and declined his offer. The train left the station at 12:35 a.m., and it was the last time anybody that knew Eve ever saw her alive. Eve's roommate, Robert Grogan, became worried when he woke up that morning and realized Eve hadn't made it home. He and Eve's father reported her missing the following day. When Eve's body was found, there were signs of restraints, and it was believed that she had been kept alive for at least a period of time after she went missing. Jack became an early suspect, but he had an alibi, and DNA later ruled him out. Little progress was made though, and the case soon went cold. Over the years, Eve's sister Irene kept pressure on investigators to keep the search for this missing person who took her sister's life alive and well. When genetic genealogy made headlines in 2018, she pushed for the same technique to be used to solve her sister's case. At the time, the rules around using the technique in New York were complicated, but the FBI wouldn't need to follow state rules. In 2021, the FBI made a breakthrough when investigators found a distant relative of the person who had committed the crime. They worked their way through the family tree to Herbert Rice, a man who passed away in 1991. At the time of the crime, he had been living with his mother on the same street where Eve was found. His mother had been interviewed in the initial investigation, but she claimed she hadn't seen anything unusual. Rice had never been a suspect. Investigators approached one of Rice's sons to ask for a DNA sample, which he allowed. The sample proved Rice had to be the person responsible for taking Eve's life. To be absolutely certain, Rice's body was exhumed. A sample taken matched DNA found at the scene of the crime. It came as a shock to Rice's family, who he hadn't been close to. They had never known about the crime. For Eve's friends and family, solving the crime couldn't bring her back, but it could give some closure now that this cold case is finally closed. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.